They say the most dangerous weapon is a woman with nothing to lose. They are wrong. The most terrifying force is a mother underestimated for over 2 decades, suddenly receiving a secret distress code from her only daughter. Ironically, the man who always mocked my perceived weakness just pushed our child into a death trap. Tonight, my buried past awakens, and the ultimate price for his arrogance will be paid in blood and sheer terror. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Lucy Shaw. I am 44 years old, and to the rest of the world, I am nothing more than the mild-mannered, quiet owner of a small floral boutique in suburban Seattle. Tonight, however, the warm, amber glow of Le Ciel, a ridiculously overpriced French restaurant downtown, felt more like a harsh interrogation lamp. I sat at a corner table with my ex-husband, Greg, our 21-year-old daughter, Maya, and her new boyfriend, Julian. The restaurant was incredibly noisy, filled with the clinking of expensive crystal and the loud, self-important chatter of the city's elite. Every sound seemed amplified, designed to overwhelm the senses. Greg loved places like this. He thrived on the performance of wealth. As the slick and perpetually arrogant chief financial officer of a mid-sized investment firm, he wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than a year of rent for my greenhouse. He spent the entire evening making sure everyone at our table knew exactly how important he was. Julian, introduced as a flashy tech entrepreneur and Maya's current boss, sat opposite me. He wore an expensive velvet blazer and maintained a charming, calculated smile, but something about his posture radiated an oppressive, quiet control. Greg leaned back in his chair and swirled his vintage red wine, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Julian, you really have to understand," Greg said, his voice carrying easily over the soft jazz playing in the background. "Lucy here has never taken a single risk in her entire life. I am not exaggerating. During our marriage, if a car backfired down the street, she would practically dive under the sofa. She is terrified of loud noises, terrified of conflict, terrified of her own shadow." He let out a loud, obnoxious laugh, seeking validation from Julian. "I remember this one time we went camping," Greg continued, his voice booming. A small branch snapped outside the tent. Just a tiny twig. Lucy literally cried and begged me to call the park rangers. She was convinced it was a bear coming to eat us. I spent 2 hours calming her down. She has zero survival instinct. I always had to be the shield in our marriage. Running a flower shop is exactly her speed. Dirt, water, and plants that cannot talk back or startle her. I offered a demure, sheepish smile, allowing a faint blush of manufactured embarrassment to creep up my neck. I deliberately hunched my shoulders forward, making myself appear physically smaller. I did not argue. I let him weave his fabricated, humiliating tales of my profound cowardice. The more I shrank into my seat, playing the pathetic victim, the more Greg's chest puffed out. The facade of the harmless, weak, middle-aged woman was a second skin to me, and I wore it flawlessly. I let him gloat. I let him think he was the apex predator at this table. It was always easier to let loud. Foolish men believed they were in charge. But beneath my lowered lashes and my polite, nervous giggles, my mind was not cowering. It was a cold, calculating machine. The trained observer inside me, a ghost from a past Greg knew absolutely nothing about, cataloged every micro-expression and every subtle movement around the table. I noticed the way Julian's hand vanished under the heavy white linen tablecloth. He was not just resting his hand on Maya's leg. From the slight tension in his shoulder and the awkward, rigid angle of Maya's posture, I knew he was gripping her wrist. His fingers were locked around her skin, a silent, painful anchor keeping her tethered to him. "So, Maya," I said softly, keeping my voice gentle and maternal, "how are you liking the new software division you mentioned last month that it was quite challenging?" Before Maya could even draw a breath to respond, Julian smoothly intercepted. Maya is doing exceptionally well, Julian said, his voice like oiled steel. She is a natural talent, but she still has a lot to learn about the corporate world. I am guiding her closely. We work long hours, but she is very obedient. Obedient, the word hung in the air. Sickening and wrong. Maya offered a fragile, rehearsed nod. Her eyes, usually so bright and full of fiery independence, darted frantically toward the exit before snapping back to her half-eaten plate. The terror in that split-second glance was unmistakable to anyone who knew how to look for the signs of captivity. Maya was not in love. Maya was being managed, handled like a volatile asset. When the suffocating, unbearable dinner finally came to an end, we stepped out onto the sidewalk. The damp, cool Seattle air offered a brief moment of relief. The valet brought their cars around to the front. I stepped forward and pulled Maya into a tight embrace. As my chest pressed against hers, the illusion of normalcy shattered completely. I felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, beating at a frantic, unnatural rhythm. I slid my hand down her arm and took her hand in mine. Her skin was like ice, slick with cold sweat. Maya, honey, is everything okay? I whispered directly into her ear, my voice barely carrying over the hum of the idling luxury engines. Before she could form a single syllable, Julian's heavy hand clamped onto her shoulder, his grip possessive and tight. We have a very early morning. Lucy, it was an absolute pleasure meeting you, he said, his tone entirely devoid of actual warmth. Maya pulled away instantly, her eyes refusing to meet mine. Bye, Mom, she muttered, her voice trembling. She practically rushed into the passenger seat of Julian's sleek black sports car. I stood on the wet curb, the damp chill seeping into my wool coat, watching their red taillights disappear into the thick mist. My maternal instincts screamed that something was deeply wrong, but nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare that was about to unfold. The drive back to the suburbs was a blur of slick asphalt and blinding headlights. A sudden, violent thunderstorm had rolled in off the coast, turning the highway into a treacherous black river. The wipers on my old, reliable sedan slapped aggressively against the windshield, fighting a losing battle against the torrential downpour. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to make my knuckles turn white. Maya's icy skin and frantic pulse still haunted the tips of my fingers. Then, the phone sitting in the cup holder vibrated, a single, sharp buzz. I glanced down. It was a text from Maya. Just 4 words. Yellow orchid, winter soil. My foot slammed the brake pedal to the floor. The tires shrieked, burning rubber against the wet pavement as the car skidded wildly before slamming to a halt on the desolate shoulder of the highway. Rain hammered against the metal roof like gunfire. I stared at the glowing screen. This was no drunken mistake. This was no autocorrect error. When Maya was exactly 12 years old, long before she cared about boys or careers, I sat her down and made her memorize a failsafe. I told her the world was unpredictable and that if she ever found herself in a situation where she was trapped, where her life was in imminent danger, and where she was being watched so closely she could not speak freely, she needed a code. Yellow orchid, winter soil. It was a red-level distress signal. It meant I am a captive, they will kill me, and I have no way out. In the space of a single heartbeat, the timid, soft-spoken florist ceased to exist. The heavy cloak of forced mediocrity I had worn for 2 decades evaporated into the humid air of the car cabin. My posture snapped straight, the deliberate hunch vanishing. The frantic maternal panic in my chest was instantly crushed, replaced by a freezing mechanical calm. My heart rate plummeted, my breathing slowed, evening out into the measured, rhythmic inhales of a predator catching a scent. I looked in the rearview mirror. The warm, anxious mother was gone. The eyes staring back at me were dead, hollow, and sharp as shattered glass. Before the flower shop, before Greg, and before suburban parent-teacher meetings, I belonged to Vanguard Echelon Solutions, We did not exist on any government payroll. We were a private, highly classified intelligence and intervention syndicate. When diplomatic negotiations failed, when hostages were taken by cartels or radical warlords, and when governments refused to officially intervene, Vanguard sent me. I was their premier extraction specialist and psychological infiltrator. I spent my youth navigating blood-soaked rooms and negotiating with monsters, pulling the innocent from the jaws of certain death. I retired to give Maya a normal life, wrapping myself in the ultimate camouflage of a weak, pathetic housewife. I threw the car into reverse, spinning the steering wheel with violent precision. I did not head toward my suburban house. I drove straight back to the floral boutique. The shop was pitch black when I arrived. I bypassed the main entrance, slipping through the alleyway and unlocking the heavy iron gate leading to the greenhouse. The air inside smelled of damp earth, blooming jasmine, and decaying leaves. I walked past the rows of delicate terrariums and exotic ferns until I reached the back corner, where the floorboards were permanently warped from humidity. I knelt, sweeping aside a heavy ceramic pot. Beneath the wood, a hidden biometric scanner waited in the dark. I pressed my thumb against the glass. A soft green light scanned my print, followed by the heavy metallic thud of a steel locking mechanism disengaging. I pulled the floorboard up, revealing a narrow concrete staircase descending into the earth. The bunker was exactly as I had left it, cold, sterile, and heavily fortified. Fluorescent lights flickered to life, illuminating walls lined with custom-molded tactical armor, suppressed weaponry, and rows of pristine, lethal blades. In the center of the room sat a massive desk covered in high-powered servers, tracking modules, and encrypted communication arrays. I powered on the primary console. The cooling fans roared to life. I reached into a sealed drawer and pulled out a heavy dust-covered satellite phone. I bypassed the standard frequencies, tapped into a dark web relay network, and typed out a rapid sequence of hidden coordinates. I hit send. The signal bounced off 3 different orbital satellites before vanishing into the ether. My ghosts would answer the call. Next, I brought up the global tracking interface. A year ago, under the guise of repairing a torn seam, I had embedded a military-grade microchip deep into the leather lining of Maya's favorite everyday handbag. It ran on kinetic energy and emitted a localized pulse that was virtually undetectable to civilian sweeping devices. I typed in the decryption key. A digital map of the Pacific Northwest materialized on the massive screen. A pulsing red dot appeared. I zoomed in, bypassing the city grid, following the trajectory deep into the dense, isolated wilderness of the Cascade Mountains. The coordinates locked onto a massive parcel of private land. It was a fortress. The architectural blueprints on the satellite feed showed reinforced concrete, gated choke points, and thermal blind spots. Worse, the surrounding 10 miles were a total cellular dead zone. Julian was not just bringing her to a home, he had dragged her into a high-tech prison. I cracked my neck, the sound echoing sharply in the underground room. Julian thought he was a wolf. He was about to find out what happens when you drag a cub into the den of a monster. The drive to the foothills of the Cascade Mountains took exactly 45 minutes. The storm had intensified significantly, washing out the winding, treacherous dirt roads, but I drove completely by muscle memory. I killed the headlights as I approached the designated coordinates, letting the violent flashes of lightning guide my path. The rusted, hollowed-out shell of an abandoned logging warehouse loomed in the absolute darkness. I parked the car deep inside the cavernous structure, the tires crunching softly over broken glass and decayed wood. The air smelled of wet rust and old engine oil. Stepping out into the freezing downpour, I did not need to search for them. They were already there. Standing in the shadows like statues carved from the night itself were 3 men and 1 woman, all clad in pitch black, water-resistant tactical gear. My old unit, the Vanguard Extraction Squad. Elias, the team's heavy munitions specialist, stepped forward first. He was a mountain of a man with a jagged scar running down his jawline. Next to him stood Marcus, our close-quarters combat expert, and Sarah, the lethal phantom who handled long-range sniper overwatch. We did not exchange hugs. We did not offer warm greetings. The bond we shared was forged in the blood-soaked mud of Eastern Europe 12 years ago, on a botched Black Ops extraction where I had dragged each of them out of a collapsing, burning compound while taking heavy fire. They owed me their lives, and tonight I was calling in the debt. "It has been a long time, Lucy," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the pounding rain. "We thought you were permanently retired, playing the quiet, happy housewife." "The housewife is dead," I replied evenly, my voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. Marcus tossed me a heavy, weatherproof duffel bag. As I caught it, the metallic clank of the hardware inside triggered a sudden, vivid sensory flash in my mind. The sound of Greg mocking my fear of loud noises at the restaurant echoed in my head. If a car backfired down the street, I used to dive for cover. Greg thought I was a pathetic coward. He never knew the truth. I was not hiding from the noise. I was hiding from the monster it woke up. Every sudden bang, every shattered glass in that suburban house sent me straight back to a sniper alley in Belgrade. The cowering, the shaking, the panicked breathing. It was never fear. It was a desperate, agonizing psychological battle to suppress my severe post-traumatic stress disorder. I was fighting the overwhelming combat instinct to draw a weapon, secure the perimeter, and neutralize everyone in the room. I played the terrified victim because if I let my true reflexes take over, my perfect family cover would have been destroyed in an instant. I endured Greg's humiliating insults for 20 years just to keep the darkness away from my daughter. A sharp whistle snapped me back to the present. The fourth member of the team, a wiry, restless man known only as Ghost, stepped out from the back of an armored tactical vehicle. He was our technical lead and the most dangerous digital hacker Vanguard ever employed. He slapped a ruggedized tablet onto the hood of the vehicle. The screen illuminated our faces with a harsh, ghostly blue glow. "I ran the coordinates you sent from the bunker," Ghost said, his fingers flying across the digital keyboard with blinding speed. "Your boy Julian is not a tech entrepreneur. The software company is a highly sophisticated front. He is a high-level money launderer washing hundreds of millions of dollars for the Sinaloa drug cartels. He uses algorithmic cryptocurrency tumbling to hide the cash. That mountain villa you tracked Maya to. It is not a vacation home. It is an armored, off-the-grid server farm and a high-tech fortress." Ghost pulled up the structural blueprints he had just breached from a secure county zoning database. Reinforced steel doors, independent power grids, biometric locks, and thermal cameras scanning a 1-mile radius, Ghost continued, pointing to the glowing red zones on the map. He has a private security detail of at least 15 heavily armed mercenaries patrolling the perimeter. Cell phone signals are completely jammed within a 5-mile radius. If we trip the alarms, they can scrub the servers, lock down the vault, and execute any hostages before the cartel bosses even notice a disturbance. I stared at the glowing blue lines of the fortress. I did not see an impenetrable prison. I saw a puzzle with specific, violent solutions. "We have exactly 3 minutes to formulate the breach," I stated, my tone sharp, authoritative, and totally detached. "We are not calling local law enforcement. The police will trigger a hostage standoff, and Julian will kill Maya the second he sees flashing red and blue lights. There will be no negotiations. There will be no warning shots. This is a total pacification run. We move in absolute silence. We cut the snake at the head, and we terminate every single hostile threat standing between me and my daughter." Elias and Marcus nodded in grim synchronization. Sarah simply racked the bolt of her suppressed sniper rifle, the mechanical click sounding like music. I unzipped the heavy duffel bag Marcus had thrown to me. I stripped off my damp wool coat, letting it drop into the mud, and pulled on a custom-fitted, matte black Kevlar tactical vest. The weight of the ceramic plates resting against my chest felt like an old friend welcoming me home. I strapped a customized, suppressed semi-automatic pistol to my right thigh holster. I slid a curved, obsidian black combat knife into the sheath positioned perfectly over my collarbone for a rapid cross-draw. Finally, I loaded 3 spare magazines into my belt and secured a tactical communication earpiece. I turned to face the storm, the icy rain washing away the last remnants of the suburban florist. The men and women standing beside me did not see a frightened mother. They saw their commanding officer. I stared up at the black, jagged peaks of the mountain range where my daughter was being held. My eyes were no longer human. They were the cold, dead eyes of a ruthless apex predator about to hunt. The assault began exactly 10 minutes after we finalized the blueprint strategy. The relentless storm raging across the mountain provided the perfect auditory camouflage. Through the encrypted earpiece, Ghost whispered that he had successfully intercepted the perimeter surveillance network. He fed a continuous, pre-recorded loop of empty, rain-swept courtyards to the monitoring station inside the villa. The thermal cameras were entirely blind to our presence. Elias and Marcus took the vanguard position. They moved through the flooded tree line like smoke, their footsteps completely swallowed by the thunder. Two heavily armored cartel mercenaries stood near the main reinforced gate, shivering under the deluge, their assault rifles slung lazily across their chests, in perfect, deadly synchronization. My men struck. There were no gunshots, just the sickening, wet sound of serrated combat knives slicing through vocal cords and carotid arteries simultaneously. The guards collapsed into the mud, their lifeblood washing away in the rain, silenced before they even registered the attack. With the outer perimeter secured, I approached the sheer stone wall of the eastern wing. Using a compressed pneumatic grappling hook, I fired a silent, rubber-coated titanium anchor onto the roof. I scaled the wet, slippery stone facade in under 60 seconds, hauling myself over the parapet. Above the main atrium, a massive glass skylight separated me from the interior. Using a diamond-tipped glass cutter, I removed a circular pane just large enough for my body, sliding a nylon rappel line through the opening. I descended into the darkness of the third-floor corridor, hanging suspended like a spider before dropping soundlessly onto the plush carpet. The air inside the villa was warm, smelling of expensive cigars and filtered ozone from the server farms. My heart beat at a steady, rhythmic 60 beats per minute. I was fully submerged in the kill zone. I moved through the shadows of the long, arched hallway, my footsteps completely silent. As I rounded the corner leading to the grand staircase, I encountered the first obstacle. 3 heavily armed security contractors were patrolling the landing, their tactical flashlights cutting through the dim lighting. They were big, trained men, but they were civilian contractors relying on intimidation, not true predators. I did not reach for my pistol. Gunfire, even suppressed, carried too much risk in a confined, echoing space. I drew the obsidian blade from my chest sheath. I slipped behind the rearmost guard, clamped my left hand tight over his mouth, and drove the knife upward through the base of his skull, severing his brainstem instantly. I lowered his lifeless body to the floor without a whisper. The second guard turned, his mouth opening to shout as he noticed his missing partner. But I was already in motion. I lunged forward, using his own momentum against him, and delivered a devastating palm strike directly to his trachea. The cartilage crushed inward as he grasped his ruined throat, gasping for non-existent air. I swept his legs out from under him and snapped his neck with a brutal, twisting wrench. The final guard fumbled frantically for his sidearm, panic widening his eyes. He managed to unholster his weapon, but my boot lashed out, shattering his kneecap. As he dropped, screaming in agony, I drove the hilt of my knife directly into his temple. He crumpled onto the marble tiles, unconscious and neutralized. The entire brutal exchange took less than 12 seconds. I left the bodies where they fell and descended into the bowels of the mansion. The tracking signal from Maya's bag led me deep underground, past the humming server racks, to a reinforced, titanium-plated door at the very end of a concrete tunnel. This was the safe room. "Ghost, I am at the primary vault," I whispered into the comms. "Kill the locking mechanism." "Overriding the magnetic seals right now, boss," Ghost replied, the sound of rapid keystrokes echoing in my ear. "You have a 5-second window. Breach." The heavy metallic clank of the deadbolts retracting signaled my entry. I kicked the door open, raising my suppressed pistol, my finger resting lightly on the trigger, prepared to put a bullet between the eyes of any hostile threat. I swept the room, my tactical vision processing every detail in fractions of a second. But the scene unfolding inside the concrete room made even my battle-hardened mind stutter and pause for a solitary, confusing second. Maya was there. She was bound tightly to a heavy steel chair in the far corner of the room, a thick strip of silver duct tape covering her mouth, her face streaked with terrified tears. But she was not the center of attention. Kneeling in the dead center of the room, shivering violently in a puddle of his own sweat and urine, was Greg. The arrogant, tailored chief financial officer who had spent dinner humiliating me was currently sobbing hysterically. His hands raised in desperate surrender, standing directly behind him, with the cold steel barrel of a high-caliber revolver pressed firmly against the back of Greg's perfectly styled hair, was Julian. The horrifying, sickening truth of the entire evening crashed down upon me. "Please, Julian, I am begging you. Just give me another 48 hours, Greg wailed, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched screech that echoed off the concrete walls. "I can get the money back, I swear to God I can get it." Julian laughed, a cold, empty sound. "You do not have 48 hours. Greg, you stole $15 million from my cartel escrow accounts. $15 million. You blew it all on underground baccarat and offshore sports betting. Did you honestly believe my auditors would not notice a hole that massive?" Greg sobbed harder, his entire body convulsing. He looked absolutely pathetic. "It was a bad streak. I just needed a loan I can access the emergency corporate funds on Monday morning." "You are a liar and a thief," Julian sneered, digging the gun barrel deeper into Greg's scalp. "That is exactly why I started dating your lovely, naive daughter. Did you think I actually cared about a 21-year-old intern? She was leverage. The cartel does not negotiate. Greg, we take collateral. You are going to log into your hidden digital ledger right now. Give me the decryption password for your personal cryptocurrency vault and replace every single penny you stole. If you type the wrong password, I will walk over to your daughter and blow her kneecaps off one by one." My blood turned to absolute ice. Greg had not just been an annoying, pompous ex-husband. He was a cowardly, desperate thief who had deliberately embezzled money from a ruthless drug syndicate. And when the walls closed in, instead of taking responsibility, he had remained silent while this monster infiltrated his family, seduced his child, and used her as a human shield. Greg had sold his own daughter's life to buy himself time. My finger tightened around the grip of my pistol. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to stretch and warp as I stepped fully into the light, letting the heavy steel door swing shut behind me with a resounding, final thud. The time for hiding was over. I stepped entirely out of the shadows, moving with a deliberate, lethal grace that belonged to a world neither of these men could ever comprehend. My tactical boots made absolutely no sound against the cold concrete floor, but the heavy, metallic click of my thumb disengaging the safety mechanism on my customized pistol echoed like a thunderclap in the suffocating silence of the vault. I raised my weapon, locking my arms into a flawless, unshakable firing stance. The glowing tritium night sights aligned perfectly with the tiny space just behind Julian's right ear. Greg's tear-soaked, swollen face snapped toward the noise. His eyes bulged so far out of his skull they looked completely unhinged. He stared at the matte black Kevlar armor molding to my chest, the blood-stained combat knife secured to my collarbone, and the utterly dead, emotionless void in my eyes. His brain fundamentally rejected the image standing before him. The pathetic, shivering woman who he claimed hid from backfiring cars and shrank from every conflict was standing in the center of a cartel stronghold as an angel of death. He tried to speak, to form my name, but only a wet, pathetic gurgle escaped his throat. His mind was shattering in real time. Julian was a professional criminal, and to his credit, his dark survival instincts kicked in instantly. He did not freeze in disbelief like my ex-husband. He abandoned Greg, lunging backward across the room in a single, fluid motion. He grabbed the back of Maya's heavy steel chair, violently yanking it backward so her body was positioned firmly between us as a human shield. He pressed the cold steel barrel of his high-caliber revolver brutally hard against Maya's temple. She squeezed her eyes shut, a muffled, terrified sob trapped behind the thick silver duct tape covering her mouth. "Drop the gun! Lucy!" Julian roared, his polished, arrogant charm completely vaporized, replaced by the raw, feral panic of a cornered animal. "I swear to God, I will paint this concrete wall with her brains. Drop the weapon and kick it over here right now, or your daughter dies in front of you." This was the exact moment when any real father, any man with a shred of dignity or love in his heart, would have thrown himself at the gunman to save his child. Greg was only 3 feet away from Julian. He could have tackled his legs. He could have distracted him. Instead, Greg broke completely. He did not look at Maya. He looked at me, his face twisted in a hideous, dripping mask of selfish terror. "Lucy, what the hell are you doing here?" Greg screamed, his voice fracturing into a frantic, shrill screech. "Have you completely lost your mind? Look at him. He's armed. He's going to murder us. Drop your weapon. You're making everything worse. I can still reason with him. Just do exactly what he says." "Lucy, stand down. If you pull the trigger, I'm dead. Please, just surrender. Give yourself up if you must. But whatever you do, don't let him end my life. I'm pleading with you." The sheer depravity of his words lingered like a dead weight in the stagnant air. He was literally pleading with his ex-wife to take the fall for his crimes, just so he could walk away from his own disastrous, avaricious blunders, while mercilessly holding his only child's entire future hostage. I didn't blink. I didn't alter my footing by a fraction of an inch. I refused to spare Greg even a millisecond of my attention. He was a void. He was a phantom, a miserable stain of cowardice groveling on the ground. My whole world shrank to the white-knuckled tension in my clenched fists and the beads of sweat forming on Julian's brow. I kept my voice incredibly low, lacking any human inflection, warmth, or heat. It was the voice of a machine delivering a fatal error code. "Julian," I said, the sound slicing effortlessly through Greg's pathetic, non-stop wailing. "Account number 4729, routing sequence Alpha Bravo 6, held at the Cayman Islands Secure Depository." Julian's breath hitched violently in his chest. The hand pressing the gun to Maya's head twitched. "Account number 8815, Swiss Cantonal Ledger, registered under the offshore shell corporation Apex Holdings," I continued, taking one slow, deliberate step forward. "You currently owe Hector Salamanca and the Sinaloa Northern Division roughly $45 million. You have been skimming off the top of their laundering operation for exactly 3 years, hiding the surplus in those 2 exact digital wallets to fund your own escape plan." Julian's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin looking like a bloated gray corpse. His mind scrambled desperately, trying to understand how a suburban florist from Seattle could possibly know the most intimately guarded secrets of a cartel money launderer. "5 minutes ago," I whispered, my voice dropping another octave, settling into a freezing, bone-chilling frequency that seemed to lower the temperature of the entire vault. "My technical team bypassed your multi-factor authentication. We triggered an algorithmic burn protocol. Every single cent in those accounts has been permanently wiped. We liquidated 100% of your stolen funds and scattered them across 10,000 untraceable decentralized nodes." Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Your cartel bosses already received the automated alerts indicating a total, irreversible loss of their funds," I stated, staring directly into his terrified soul. "Right now, at this exact second, a heavily armed kill squad is being dispatched from south of the border. They know you stole from them. They are coming for you. Julian, you are a dead man." The psychological weight of my words slammed into Julian like a runaway freight train. He was no longer looking at a desperate mother trying to save her kid. He realized, with a soul-crushing certainty, that he had dragged a true monster out of the underworld, the sheer terror of the cartel's incoming wrath, combined with the impossible, reality-breaking fact of his bank accounts vanishing into thin air, shattered his composure entirely. His breathing became erratic, ragged gasps filling the silence, the heavy revolver in his hand, previously held with steady, arrogant conviction, began to tremble violently against Maya's skin, his finger slipping dangerously close to the trigger guard as the pressure completely crushed him. The sheer magnitude of the financial destruction finally broke Julian's discipline. For one fatal, microscopic fraction of a second, his eyes darted away from me. His free hand twitched, instinctively reaching toward his breast pocket to grab his encrypted phone and verify the catastrophic loss of his cartel funds. That single moment of divided attention was all I needed. I curled my left thumb inward, pressing a tiny concealed pressure switch stitched into the fabric of my tactical glove. Outside the vault, positioned directly next to the heavy intake vent, Elias had planted a military-grade stun grenade. The detonation was apocalyptic. A blinding, localized supernova of white light erupted through the ventilation shaft, accompanied by a deafening concussive boom that instantly ruptured the equilibrium of everyone in the room. Because I had initiated the blast, my eyes were already squeezed shut, and my weapon was already locked onto the target. I squeezed the trigger. The suppressed pistol coughed a single, heavy round. The bullet shattered the cylinder of Julian's revolver and tore through his knuckles. He screamed, his grip disintegrating as the ruined weapon clattered onto the concrete floor. Before he could even register the agonizing pain in his hand, I crossed the distance between us. I launched a devastating horizontal strike with my combat boot directly into the side of his right knee. The joint snapped backward with a sickening, wet crunch. Julian collapsed into a pathetic, writhing heap on the floor, howling in absolute agony. In perfect synchronization, the heavy steel door swung wide open. Elias, Marcus, and Sarah flooded into the room, their weapons raised. Within 3 seconds, they had zip-tied Julian's wrists and secured the entire underground sector. The cartel threat was entirely neutralized. I dropped my pistol into its holster and slid my combat knife out of its sheath. I stepped behind Maya's chair and sliced through the thick nylon ropes binding her wrists. I gently peeled the silver duct tape away from her mouth. Maya did not hesitate. She practically leaped out of the chair, throwing her arms around my neck, burying her face into the cold Kevlar armor on my chest. She sobbed violently, but as she pulled back and looked up at me, there was no fear in her eyes. Despite the blood, the tactical gear, and the ruthless violence she had just witnessed, she looked at me with profound, overwhelming admiration. She knew she was completely safe. From the corner of the room, a pathetic shuffling sound broke the tender moment. Greg, miraculously unharmed, was slowly pushing himself off the floor. He wiped the dried sweat and grime from his face, trying to smooth down his ruined designer suit, in a display of delusion so profound it bordered on insanity. He forced a shaky, awkward smile. "Lucy," Greg gasped, his voice trembling but attempting to sound authoritative. "You did it. Oh my God. You actually saved us. I knew you had it in you. Listen, we can fix this. We can go to the police together. Tell them Julian kidnapped us. We can put this whole ugly nightmare behind us. We can start over. Lucy, just the 3 of us. A real family again." He took a step forward, extending his arms as if he expected me to embrace him. I slowly turned my head, fixing him with a stare so utterly devoid of humanity it stopped him dead in his tracks. I looked right through his pathetic, cowardly soul. Reaching into one of my utility pouches, I retrieved a small, encrypted flash drive and tossed it onto the floor at his feet. "What is this?" Greg stammered, staring down at the drive. "That is your legacy, Greg," I replied, my words slicing through the bitter air. "It holds every single digital receipt, every forged signature, and every encrypted ledger mapping out exactly how you embezzled $15 million. It also includes the audio recording from 5 minutes ago, the one where you begged me to take the fall and destroy my own life, all so you could save your own skin." Greg turned a sickly shade of white. "Lucy, Please, you cannot do this. I already did, I stated flatly. Ghost forwarded that entire packet to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation roughly 10 minutes ago. They traced the source IP address. You have about 5 minutes before a federal strike team breaches the main gate. You are going to spend the rest of your miserable, cowardly life rotting in a maximum security federal prison. I turned my back on him without another word, wrapping my arms securely around Maya's shoulders, and guided my daughter out of the underground tomb. We left Greg standing alone in the dark, weeping as the distant, approaching wail of police sirens began to echo through the mountains. An hour later, I was driving my car back down the winding mountain pass. The violent storm had finally broken, giving way to the soft, golden light of dawn creeping over the horizon. The heater was running on full blast, warming the cabin. Maya sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in a heavy thermal blanket, sipping a bottle of water. She stared at me for a long time, watching my calm, relaxed grip on the steering wheel. "Mom," Maya asked softly, her voice still raspy, "how long did you hide this person from me?" I kept my eyes on the road, a gentle, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time all night. "I never hid her, sweetheart. I just put her away so you could grow up in a bright, normal world. But you have to understand something. To protect you, I am willing to burn that entire world down." Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Zoe Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.